So hi, everybody. I'm David, and we have Aaron Kernis here. And we're going to talk about our more than 40-year collaboration of creating new guitar music. So I'm just going to jump right in here. We met at school, and that's my first little hint to you who are those of you who are still in school, is go check out the composers around you and see what's going on. I don't remember exactly how Aaron and I met. I don't know if he does, but I remember being, interested in him as a person and a friend, and also in his musical mind right away. And I remember a couple of things that he said to me very early on, which really stuck with me. He said he wanted to write music with emotional directness and without irony. That was one of his goals. And another thing that he said was he liked to stretch instrumentalists sort of out of their comfort zone. And that struck me also because I love getting out of my comfort zone. So, I just became interested, and he wrote a first piece for me when we were still in school, and he couldn't even legally drink yet. And, I don't know. I would say it's probably not advisable to start out with a solo guitar piece. I think it's probably safer to write for the guitar in a mixed ensemble. But all of you, I think the composers are starting with solo. And we did too, so we found our way. But it's the most exposed way, of course, to write for the guitar, to write a solo piece like that.
I think I learned the most, actually, I have to say. I mean, that's the upside to starting with the solo piece and really kind of confronting the difficulties head on, because once you have a lot of buffers if when you're writing pieces with guitar and ensemble or guitar and string quartet, whatever, and you can kind of more easily concentrate on the things that guitar does easily. But when you're working with solo music, you just kind of have to deal with what the instrument really is, and that's definitely more challenging.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, with that first solo piece, which we're going to discuss right now, we went through the most changes that had for sure the most transformations. But just to talk about Aaron's music for guitar in general, just before we get into that, he has used the guitar in a lot of different guises. He's shown us the pop element of it, or the pop aspect of it, in 100 Greatest Dance Hits. He showed a jazz side, a lyrical side, a rhythmic side. He used the guitar as an accompanimental instrument in several of his pieces. And we have worked very hard throughout this collaboration to get as big a range out of the guitar as we could. So we have often found ourselves lowering the bottom string. And the piece you're going to hear, the very first piece, has the sixth string in C for half of the partita. We often use D, we used E flat sometimes. And on the other side, we use the high C quite a bit, knowing that a lot of instruments don't have the high C. So there's always an oscilla or an asterisk saying, here's an alternative if you don't have that note. And just even the other day, we were discussing the end of his most recent solo piece, Soliloquy, where he uses very high artificial harmonics, where you get almost as much production noise as you get pitch, but just in an attempt to get as much of a range out of the guitar as we could. And he also probably uses Bartok pizzas on the guitar more than most non-guitarist composers do, because that's the loudest single sound we can make on a note. So we found ourselves going there quite a bit in a number of his pieces. So yeah, let's start out with this partita. So as I mentioned, Aaron was writing this when he was, very young. We were both very young. And maybe you want to talk about it. It's a process piece, right?
Well, the when I was 20, between the years pretty much 19 to 23, I was really interested in minimalism and in mathematical processes. And so, and a lot of that was because I needed to find a way of controlling, to figuring out how to use the various parameters of music, how to use length, how to use harmonic structures, which I had a little bit of training in, but which came gradually. So I was searching for an external controlling device, which became these mathematical processes, to help me start to form, to help me start to create larger forms, and also harmonically kind of harmonically driven forms, kind of by setting up this first large phrase will be this long. The phrases would be controlled by additive, more and more beats or more or less and less beats per phrase, things like that. It just helped me as a really young composer to start controlling my musical environment. And so as such, because I was particularly interested for those years in minimalism, the music tends to be often very, very diatonic and using a very limited number of pitches. So the first movement, which is the chaconne, is really like almost like a simple pop song, but it has a few elements of these numerical processes. Other movements in the partita, like the toccata and what's the second movement called, David?
Passacaglia.
Passacaglia are very heavily created with these numerically based phrases in mind. Now, what I found, now the first movement works really well. It's very kind of generous on the guitar, but in the other movements, these structures really had precedence, and so in certain ways, I was actually writing. I was almost ignoring the guitar as for what it is, and I was writing these structures that kind of had to be. It had to use certain registers. They were imposed upon the guitar, and so in a way, a lot of the piece is working against some of the some kind of basic aspects of the guitar, which in later pieces I was much more able to confront head on.
And that's where I came in, because, and those younger guitarists here should come in, because there were points where I really had to speak up. For instance, in the Passacaglia itself, it's basically 3 lines moving along, and it's in G minor. The idea of the piece was the first movement is in C, the toccata is in E, and the middle movement is in G. And so it kind of outlined C major triad, I guess, in terms of the key structure. But it didn't really work on the guitar in G minor. So I insisted that we move it up to A minor. And then we had another problem, which is we had 2 quite long movements, sort of sister kind of movements, chaconnes and passacaglia, all in kind of the same tonality. And they were both on the slow side and did similar things. And so I then started to argue for a movement in between them to break that up. And that argument went on for 14 years until I won. And he wrote this brilliant movement called An Echo in 1995. Really, literally 14.
Of course, by the time I wrote that movement, I already had written dance hits, right? Or was that?
Yes, 2 years before.
So my style was completely different. My language was totally different. And so it was, I'm still a tonal composer in most of these works. And so the echo works in a larger framework, but it's nowhere near as restricted or it's not minimal at all compared to the other movements.
Right, but it does use the material from it. He's using the sixth, and he still has the low C, and he picks up the ideas from the chaconne in it.
And it acts as a foil in a way. It gives the cycle, the whole partita, a sense of having breathing room, having a kind of stylistic variety that it didn't have before. It's just a 3-movement piece.
Right. And that's, in a way, it was almost more than I was arguing for, because I got, even more variety than I had even hoped for, which was great. So let's listen to a little bit of the chaconne. Maybe you could cue it up around 50 seconds. And what I would like to listen to, or for you to listen to, is the setting here, the texture itself. So the individual lines move very diatonically, but there's space between them. And this is a good way to write counterpoint on the guitar, where you have sixths or fifths, larger intervals between, but the lines themselves are moving in smaller intervals, and that fits our fretboard very well. So let's listen into this a bit.
All right, let me know if you can't hear this.
It's actually the second movement. That's not the chaconne. That's the Passacaglia. Or did you want?
No, that's the chaconne.
No, that's the Passacaglia, actually. That's the second movement, not the first.
Okay. Can we hear a little more of
No,
it?
wait, no, wait, you're right. It
I
sounds,
am right. Yeah.
you are right, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is the right one?
It's been a while. Yes.
Okay.
But that speaks to how similar they are in a way.
Very simple.
So that's probably good, just to give you a sense of the counterpoint in there. And then I don't know if you can cue up the next movement on YouTube, but it's called Echo. And you can see how we use some of the similar material to create this new movement that we got. And this Echo movement, by the way, got orchestrated later as a movement from the concerto that Naxos will release next week, Aaron's guitar concerto. Great, thank you. That's good.
That's a good place.
Yeah. So you get a sense of using the same material, but in a very different stylistic vein, I would say.
And when,
Both, you know,
when I
kind of. Go
started,
ahead.
when I started, the music was so kind of driven by its own processes that I wasn't even thinking about some of the most basic elements of guitar writing, like how to use the open strings. I mean, really basic things that are very, you know, that the use of resonance on the instrument, the use of spacing. David and I worked so hard to make the bass notes that I wanted to sustain over the upper lines, or at least be act as the kind of anchor. And I was, and you know, I was always having to adjust some of those lines so they would make reaching the bass notes possible. It just is on a kind of very basic level of kind of, as I said, working it against the instrument that was our first process, first collaboration working together. And David was, of course, you know, the kind of, you know, such a helpful guide and so crucial in those first pieces, so I could develop gradually some kind of comfort level, some kind of level of awareness of the instrument that just increased over the years since that time.
Do we have any questions yet? Okay, so I want to show you now some specifics of our process of working together with a recent piece that Aaron wrote for me 5 years ago. Before we dive into this, Luke, you are doing our YouTubes. And so while we're working on this, could you cue up? It's Aaron's double concerto for violin and guitar. And we're looking for the third movement. And I want it cued in about like 3:15 into it. Okay. And you'll have time because we're going to do something else now. But just if you could get that ready, That would be great. So I'm going to share screen now. And this is just for a visual. And I'm going to show you this soliloquy. This is the second that's a piece that the second page of the piece that he wrote for me about 5 years ago. And this is kind of a working score. This is some of Aaron's notes when we got together and started to work on the climactic section of the score. And so guitar in hand here. You guys can all hear that? Okay. Okay. So so if you look at sostenuto, measure 32, we didn't make too many changes here. We doubled this chord again. Now the original was there with 3 Bs, and we decided to go, or Aaron decided higher, just to make it more climactic. And so when we published it, we put, as I said, an ossia, so you can actually, if you don't have the top note, he still wants a C, but you would play only the bottom note of that. Okay? And then moving along, you see where it says movement. This figure involves us, to do that quickly, you have to slur the B flat. And I found myself doing it like that with a break. And Aaron adjusted the rhythm to what I was doing. So he originally wrote, which is really hard to get off this chord and get over to the B flat. So you get, so the publication looks like that. If you see measure 35, that's how we ended up publishing it. So he just made an adjustment on that to really make it more palatable for the guitar. And the big changes we did were where you see the word heavy. So this is kind of where the climax of the piece is. And we were talking the other day about how it's kind of foreign to us now because we just left that behind. But I will read to you what the original writing was. So it was, sorry. Bartok pizzas. Now, we decided to expand that climax. So what I'm going to do now is play for you the way it ended up with having you look at the first version still. So going back to movement. Sorry. So what we did here, we made 3 octaves for the Bs. Sorry. Brought this up an octave. Left some of this right where it was. Went back to the 3 octaves here. Aaron changed this from a C sharp to a D. And then so you see how we got much more range out of that. Went up an octave, and then we had all of that room to come down, down. So we just were able to expand the expression to accommodate what he wanted.
Yeah,
And
I found myself, initially after I was reacting, of course, after writing the first version, Um, that it felt like it was in too compressed, that the registers were compressed, that there wasn't enough. Um, um, I'm thinking of the word elongation, but what I mean is
Contour, maybe? Is that the word?
opening up into the upper registers of the guitar and presenting the guitar as a full register instrument in this climax. Rather, it was staying pretty much in the middle and low register in the initial version, and and certainly in my music in general, register is super important. I'm always thinking about register as a structural device. Um, and in orchestra music I use the register of the highest and lowest instruments or particular percussion instruments to delineate uh, registral kind of registral structural moments, and I found more and more as I was writing for the guitar that as you can see with this piece, I was starting to learn how to use open strings and to use them effectively, and to use them as important, of course, places of resonance, places of the opening up of the sound, and then, of course, using the entire register of the guitar as a compositional resource.
Yeah. And, I would say the collaboration, the work on a piece almost doesn't stop. I mean, we were having a discussion the other day about the very end of this piece. And, it has this sense of harmonics kind of fading into the air. But these are obscure harmonics. I'm sorry. Very hard to get. They're really way up there. And I did a video of the piece for a concert like a week ago. And, it was basically an unedited performance. And, you heard percussion. I mean, when I did a recording, I could take it many times and get these crystalline harmonics, which you'll hear in a recording that comes out next week. But in live, we were thinking, well, do they work? I mean, is it the idea that they fade out? Is that too obscure? So there can remain questions even when you have a text here that is kind of done, right?
Definitely. I mean, whenever I hear that, I mean, with the studio recording, we got the end to work quite nicely, and it does fade out, and the tone, we could edit every note, and so there weren't so many spaces. But when it actually comes to it in practice, I really realize now, even whatever 3-4 years after I wrote it, that that I've always wished for that ending to work, and I could hear it in my ear how I'd like it to work. But it's sort of like I'm again working against the instrument, and it wouldn't be a problem if I was writing for a violin, um, or some instrument that could make harmonics be very, very linear and less percussive. But in this case, it's something I'm going to be looking at, and maybe something as simple as just having the whole passage down an octave and then using harmonics at the end still, but they'll ring more successfully an octave lower.
And Aaron and I will see each other quite a few times this summer. And I bet we'll get a guitar and, think about that passage, even though the recording will then be out and, the publication's ready to go, but you can still be thinking about these things. One thing I want to add is that, in the case with Aaron, a lot of work has been getting enough expressive range that he wants. That's not true of every composer. For instance, Lou Harrison, who many of you may know, wrote me his last completed piece. And the second movement of that came, and it was a single line. It was a fast line. But in that case, I added a bass line. I added bass notes just to fill it out. So you never quite know. You have to work with each composer and try to understand their aesthetic, of course, and make it work on the guitar.
And certainly, you probably have the double concerto, a little bit of the double concerto queued up now, but the double concerto was a case where I wrote that work. All the other pieces I've written for guitar have been for David, and with the exception of the lullaby that was first for Ben Verdery, and which is an arrangement of the piano piece. And the double concerto, though, was written for Sharon Isben. And in the case of Sharon, even though we collaborated on a number of passages, I took an entirely different approach, and that was to write my version of the guitar part, and then she made her version. She took out. We didn't work through all of the details in the fashion that David and I have become used to. I really, in a sense, gave her that work, and she made it work for herself. So years later, once the recording had come out and I wanted to get the piece ready for publication in a piano version, piano reduction, David and I worked through the original version I had written and came up with, again, it's just details because the piece is still the same, but we wound up putting back in many things that were in my version, my original version, that Sharon had changed for her own, out of her own choices.
And we made actually a possibility in that part to play it on electric guitar.
Yeah.
We showed, we have a program note at the beginning, or an editor's note saying, here's how you can do this on electric. But I thought we could listen to the last 3 minutes, which is an incredible piece of orchestral and concerto writing. I mean, it's 3 minutes. There are several thousand notes going by, I would guess. And a cadenza in the middle of it. And it's just really, really great writing. So, Luke, if you do have that queued up, that would be great to hear.
Sure. How far along did you say you wanted it?
I want about 3 minutes 15. Yeah, so we're going to listen to about the last 3 minutes of the piece.
That's the first movement, though. We want the third movement.
No, it says 3 right there.
It does?
It's just that I think this is the quiet part right before.
Oh, that's the quiet. Yeah, the quiet.
Yeah, I wanted to show the whole build.
Yeah.
Okay.
I see. I was
Yeah.
expecting it to start during the cadenza.
It's just about to go crazy. So here he is with the Bartok pizzas again.
It's fast, and there are lots of notes.
Really so. And the
Right.
guitar holds its own, partly through chord playing and Bartok pitches, and single line at most. You're not going to get any counterpoint out of something like that.
But the counterpoint comes between the two instruments. But there's
Right.
the double concerto violin and guitar, and certainly one of the challenges there. I mean, the violin has no problem, of course, soaring over the orchestra, but the issue of amplification within the orchestra was something in every performance that had its challenge. Every acoustical space was different. Um, uh, Sharon had a particular device, amplifying device, that she hid pretty much within the viola, the front of the viola section, so it was not near her, with the idea that it was going to diffuse the sound and actually make the guitars make it sound like the guitar was coming from a larger acoustical space than just right where it was located. And every space was different, but and some places it worked better than others. But the real challenge was the fact the violin can sustain. And in passages like the one you just heard, where there's hardly any sustained music, it's fast, furious, and a lot of notes. They're on the guitar and violin are on more equal ground. But I was always at great pains during the rest of the piece to try to present the instruments as equal, to give them as much to do, equal amounts of stuff to do, and distinctive things to do. But still, because the violin's sustained, it just kind of is more. It comes out as a more prominent instrument in performance.
Well, that's one of the reasons we were thinking about electric guitar, because
Exactly.
it could bring power to a section like the one you just heard, but it could bring sustain to more lyrical parts.
Yep.
What I like to do with concertos is a little different than that, which is I like to have the sound feel like it's really coming from the guitar. So I'll have a local source near me and color it with the house system. But I like to have sources behind the orchestra so they can hear the guitar. So I put one on either side of the back of the orchestra. It's just a different approach, but I feel like the ensemble improves when they can all hear what the guitar is doing.
Yeah. So I guess we have a little time if any of you have any questions, specific or general. Well, it doesn't even have to just be about our relationship and guitar writing, but if you have any questions about composing in general, about the collaborative process, any of that would be great. Yeah, Ronnie.
Ronnie, sorry. Yeah. Well, yeah, just about the collaborative process. I was just interested in the comparison between you guys and between Anthony and Colin. And one thing I noticed that I liked that I also enjoyed from doing when I collaborated with a performer is that Anthony and Colin said is that they have a little chat and find kind of things that they have in common. Maybe they like a similar poet or something like that. And I'm wondering if something like that happens with you guys.
Have we had a collaboration, David, where before anything was written, where we would talk about the shape of a piece? I think most of it, I pretty much had a strong idea of what I wanted to do. And in the case of other concertos I've done with performers, I sat down with them, I've gotten to know their playing, I've gotten to see how they move, and have thought about that in the actual writing. Maybe with singers, I've sat down and said, what poetry do you like, that kind of thing. What things do we share in common? But what, if you can remind me, David, like with dance hits, I remember being on the subway in New York City and thinking and seeing kids rapping on the subway and kind of knocking on the seats and on the poles and all that kind of thing, that inspired a little bit of that. But to remind me, were there parts of the collaboration where we actually talked about the direction of the piece before it was even thought of?
I don't think about that in terms of the piece. I mean, I remember you were struggling at that time. You were in your earlier 30s, and you were getting lots of orchestral commissions at that point, and you were wrestling with a question, which was, why am I writing one kind of music in all day, and then I go out at night and I hear what you just described, or in Washington Heights, you hear Latino music and ghetto blasters in those days. Why is this divide between the music I'm writing during the day and what I hear when I just go out in the street? And could I possibly find a way to combine them? And then I think the guitar leapt to your mind because it's the ultimate crossover instrument, and string quartet is kind of the ultimate classical ensemble. So I remember talking about things like that in terms of forming the idea. But in terms of the actual piece, I don't remember that. I remember we spent an entire summer working on the guitar part, excuse me. While I was traveling around, we were faxing, little clips back and forth. But in terms of that, I don't remember talking about it in terms of shaping the actual music before the process happened.
But when it was written, certainly we had a great deal of work together, and at that time it was faxes, and now it's PDFs, of course, and which makes life a lot easier no matter where you are in the world, which is one of those great technological developments.
Well, and also Zoom. I mean, we can just get on and play it for anywhere. But in those days, I would have to send a cassette tape. I'd record it and send it to you. I mean, it was way different.
So there are definitely some very positive aspects of the technological revolution. But on the other hand, sometimes you just want to be left alone, and you don't want to be reached with PDFs and recordings, and and it's harder to get to that desert island. And it's very hard to just shut the thing off. So anyway.
Aaron has been looking for an opera subject for some decades now, and we've been in that discussion. It has nothing to do with the guitar, but we send each other books back and forth, and been very involved in that part. Yeah. Other questions?
Maybe this doesn't apply directly to you and you guys, but what do you do when you have something that's totally unplayable? How do you approach, the composer and raise the subject?
Well, you have to first. You have to speak up. I mean, if something's unplayable, and depending on your relationship with the composer, I would pick your battles and just sort of test the waters and start with a specific thing and say, look, this doesn't work, and see how much flexibility you're finding that you can establish a relationship where you can really say. But you should not leave yourself in a position where something is not workable or not comfortable enough to play. I mean, you are, after all, the face of this thing. You're the one who's walking on the stage. The composer's out there, hopefully in the audience, but you're presenting this thing. So it absolutely has to be comfortable, and it can get scary with a famous composer saying, look, this doesn't work, and every composer will be different. I mean, when Henze wrote me the guitar concerto, he had at that point written hours and hours of guitar music. He had written Kammermusik, the Tentos, Rural Winter Music, El Cimarron, on and on. He wrote me a note, and he said, look, I'm going to write what I want to hear, and you make it work for your instrument, but please don't lose too many notes. So it was just open-ended. And I was like 25. He was trusting, a kid that young. But he wrote in the fourth movement of that concerto 8, 9, and 10 note chords. And I confronted him about it. I said, Hans, you know the guitar better than this. And he goes, well, I just wrote all the notes that I like and want to hear. Just make guitar chords out of it. And I can tell you that's great fun for me. I mean, I'm not a composer. I don't do well with the blank page, but creating music like this, working with people with great ears like Henze or Aaron, is that's my happy place, So with each composer, the relationship will be different. And, I wouldn't start out too strong and say, look, you wrote a terrible piece and it's too hard and you got to start again. Just develop a relationship.
Figure out how to say those, how to approach the person. And that's where knowing a little of their personality might help, a kind of intuitive feeling out of how that might best be expressed. And certainly, I mean, in my long experience, performers in 998 out of 1,000 want to be really generous and they want to make it work. So there are levels from this is awkward, this is challenging, this is awkward, this is idiomatic, and it's impossible. So to kind of find, and each element that you'll try to work on and improve is usually at a different place in that, along that in those gradations. And so similarly, finding the way to speak about these in a coming at it in the most positive way, and just working with a lot of good feeling to make it work as best as possible really goes a long way to make the lines of communication and the relationship work well.
Yeah. And I as a performer, I want to be challenged. I want to come out of my comfort zone. So, numerous times I've said to Aaron and other people, look, this is really something I haven't encountered. It's really different. I'm not sure about it. Let me work with it for a while and I'll get back to you and then, tell you how it goes. So, you try and see if you can find a way. And then I might come to Aaron and say, look, I can get most of this, but this one place I need to talk to you about, and so you zero in on it. Yeah.
So maybe we have time if we have one more question, and then I think we should break so you have a moment before your next session.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Ronnie.
Ronnie, yeah.
Just a question for Aaron. I was interested in what you were saying about the mathematical structures and stuff that you choose, and that you were talking about. I think it was in your early days of composing. I don't know if you still do that now.
I don't use them now, except they have a large scale effect through my life about proportion.
Right.
I
was interested in the fact that basically, hearing that fantastic concerto just now, just loads of fun. And you talked about minimalism, and your music seems to be often tonal. Seems like that your aesthetic is someone who just loves and really enjoys listening to music and the experience of music, rather than having these sort of boxes and organizing everything in this sort of way. And so I'm wondering how mathematics and those sorts of structures played a role in your design of music.
Yeah, thanks. A great question. So again, when I was, late teen, early 20s, I was really finding a way to structure music. I really did not. At that point, I was writing mostly pieces with text or short pieces, and I really didn't know how to think about larger forms and larger structures, and how to make a piece do a number of different things. So in a way, as a crutch, but as a tool is a better word than crutch. I was looking for some way that I could begin to think about larger form. And so I began to think, and so somehow around that time, I had become familiar with John Cage's early piano pieces, the Metamorphosis and the String Quartet, and I didn't know so much the preludes in the inventions, preludes. I forget the name right now, but a lot of his early work was highly mathematical.
Square root form and stuff, wasn't it?
And I found, and I started to think, okay, well, if this first phrase is this many beats long, and I want to extend the thought, just really simple stuff, that this phrase would be 8 beats long, this phrase would be 12, and I would gradually move to 40, and then back. And I would use these kind of accordion kind of structures where it would, the phrase shapes would get shorter or longer and vice versa. And as I said, these enabled me to kind of create components of a form, and develop a piece over larger spans of time, so that when I dropped that stuff when I was 23, I already had developed an internal idea of proportion.
Right.
And then I never really looked back at the mathematics of it, but always look at the timing of proportion, and as I said, register and all these other elements that go into
Right, that's the sense I got. Thank you very much.
Welcome. So I think we'd better, so you have a little time between the next thing, we'd probably better hightail it out of here.
Well, thank you, Aaron and David, both of you, for coming in and doing this. This was tremendously fantastic. Thank you both.
Great, our pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, all of you. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, David, for kind of making the container.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, everybody. Great to
Okay.
meet you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Thanks, David. Great to see you.
You too, Colin.